I'm afraid I'm having to record another video in my car here. I just want to start out this introductory video for week 2 by thanking you for the fine conversation that we've been having in the forums this first week. I appreciate both the tone and the thoughtfulness of your initial responses and the comments. So thanks for your hard work and for getting us off to a good start. I want to use the bulk of this video to segue between week 1 and week 2, offer a few sort of responses to the conversation that we had the first week, and lay some groundwork for what you're going to be seeing in week 2. First of all, I want to highlight what many of you have pointed out in your forum responses, which is that reading the Gospel of Matthew without all of the chapter and verse number divisions and the other headings that are useful for some purposes but not for others has been enlightening for you, because suddenly you've been able to track all kinds of thematic connections, development across the story, and see the relationships among the various scenes of the story. And I hope that you're finding that just to be the tip of the iceberg, so that as you move forward out of this class, you'll have a deep appreciation for the nature of narrative written communication. And the rest of our class, I hope, will continue to illuminate the meaning of the story of the Gospel according to Matthew, by tending to its narrative form of presentation. The next issue that I want to raise here is in response to the excellent posts on who is Israel, who are the children of Israel, and the sort of other sub-questions that inevitably become a part of that. Israel's relationship with the Gentiles, who is David and his son, the future hope for Israel. What many of you, I think, felt immediately when I asked such a difficult, far-reaching question like that was that you couldn't give a definition. You can't give a definition of Israel. What you have to do is to tell a story. To tell a story as the Bible does. In this case, following some of the key texts that have come down to us as part of that story of Israel. So that already hopefully gets you thinking about some of the difficulties, but also riches that we'll be encountering in the Gospel according to Matthew. Many people come to the Gospel of Matthew thinking that Israel is the sort of thing that you can define, and that what Jesus is doing is defining Israel over against others in some kind of immediate sense. And I just don't think that that's faithful to the presentation of Israel according to the scriptures that are everywhere appealed to as authoritative in the Gospel of Matthew, what we call the Old Testament. So we don't have a definition of Israel that we could then use to develop criteria, for example, for determining who belongs and who doesn't. Instead, we have to tell a story. Of course, the trouble doesn't end there, though, because how you tell the story of Israel is a matter of immense complexity and of tremendous stakes. I think I have alluded in previous communications with you that how you tell the story of Israel is actually something that has deeply shaped the geopolitical formation of the world in which you and I find ourselves, because Christian people have used a certain kind of new Israel or pure Israel or spiritual Israel ideology to make their claims about who has power to rule, who belongs in society, who doesn't, who is chosen and who is not, etc. Some of you have noticed that set of questions about how to tell the story of Israel has now implicated recently this development of a modern nation state called Israel. And how what we're doing relates to that modern state, I think, is a very complex matter. I hope you won't rush to any conclusions about that. Even the terms here are fraught because you can't understand Israel in the ancient world as a nation state, for example, like we think of nations today or countries today. It's a very different sort of social phenomenon. Um, Likewise, the sort of grounds on which the modern state of Israel has built up its project are in a variety of tensions with what we might call the inheritance of the scriptural story. So watch out for the tendency to kind of romanticize Israel or to allow this modern development of the nation state to suddenly monopolize what it means to be Israel. We're going to have to be a little more nuanced with how we use the testimony of the Bible about who Israel is, about what the future of Israel entails, etc. Okay, so one of the issues that comes up as we try to tell the story of Israel faithfully, which I think, by the way, is something always that has to be done by multiple people in multiple ways. You already have that in the Bible, by the way. But this issue is the tendency that we modern evangelical Christians in particular have of deriving from the story of Israel as we read it and as it comes into the New Testament a kind of fundamental distinction between the physical and the spiritual. And so we will tend to bring into the story of Matthew and other parts of the New Testament some notion that the characters in the story, especially those most opposed to Jesus, don't understand that Jesus hasn't come to be a physical Messiah, he's a spiritual Messiah. And I just want to make my claim here at the beginning of the class that I think that is fundamentally wrong. That, as you've read in the Old Testament, there is no departure from the physical, the material, the bodily, the earthly, that can be understood to characterize the revelation of God, who Israel is, the hope for Israel's future. And so in the Gospel according to Matthew, Jesus is going to be deeply concerned about people's bodies, about their relationships with one another, about the conditions of the land in which they're living, about the way that they're engaging the presence of oppressive Gentile rulers and their sort of local elites who are collaborating with them. So it's certainly true that Jesus is going to focus, for example, on, say, matters of the heart. But matters of the heart, according to the Bible, are not somehow not physical or pre-physical or something. In fact, Jesus is going to teach his disciples to pray, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." So I just want to flag what I take to be a problematic distinction between the spiritual and the physical here at the beginning of the class, and invite you to at least consider the possibility that Jesus remains deeply concerned with the physical conditions of people's lives, with the physical condition of his community, with the physical nature of their future, and that this is important for us to know what it means to be Christian, what it means to follow Jesus. This is going to involve how we engage the bodily nature of life, our relationships with others, etc., etc. So, just to flag that distinction for you, maybe one way to focus that a little bit is to remember what I had you read in 1 Maccabees. I'm very slow to look down my nose at the Maccabean revolutionaries, given the kind of oppression that they were enduring. Remember that one of the things that Antiochus Epiphanes did, for example, was to attack the organs of Israel's life, the practice of Sabbath, which is the basic political economic institution of the society, including its way of measuring time, attacks the institution of circumcision, which is closely related to how names are conveyed across generations, how land inheritance is negotiated, has a lot to do with the memory of the community as well. Antiochus Epiphanes, if someone dares to circumcise their son according to the law of the historic people of Israel and their God, he has the child killed, hung around the mother's neck, and tells the mother to go and walk among the people, her community, to show them what happens if you resist the power of Antiochus Epiphanes. He attacks the scriptures of Israel, which are the memory, the law. We could go on. The point is, when this kind of oppression begins to befall people and they react in violence, my first impulse, at least, is not to condemn them, even if, as we'll find with Jesus, he is going to say that trying to liberate ourselves through violence is not powerful enough. You should probably know that the memory of the Maccabean revolt is relatively recent for the characters in the story and the writer of the story. And as romantic a telling as some of our current stories about the Maccabean period are, in fact, it turned in time to be a terrible disappointment for the remnant of the kingdom of Judah, the Jews that had regathered there in the land. And so not all the people in Jesus' day, for example, are expecting a military liberator. There's a huge portion of the population that, as desperate as they are for freedom from Roman rule and local corruption, have come to the conviction that organizing themselves as militias and striking out with the sword to try to liberate themselves can only achieve a short-lived victory that will eventuate, as it has so many times in Israel's past, in more reprisals, more systemic injustice, a memory of bitterness among enemies who will seek revenge. And so it's a mistake, I think, to frame the entire story of Matthew as first of all, Jesus as a spiritual Messiah over against the physical expectations of the people, or as Jesus coming as a figure who seeks liberation through peace when everybody else is committed to violence. That's just not the case. And one other reason, by the way, not to be very judgmental of people who might have some longing for liberation even through means of violence, is to remember that most of us who are taking this class live in lands and societies that are addicted to violence and claim freedom ourselves through acts of violence in the past and in the present. So we don't want to be living in a community like that and looking down our nose at people who rejected Jesus because he said that violence was not powerful enough. That in fact, there was a way of serving God more powerful than violence that would bring the future that Israel longed for and that the prophets had promised. So, watch out for the spiritual, physical distinction. Watch out for looking down our nose at people who resort to violence in pursuit of freedom under terrible oppression. One last duality that came out in the forums, and I was just so impressed with how thoughtful some of your responses are. It's the tension between Israel being the one chosen people of God and the clear promises and hopes for the Gentile peoples of the world, peace between Israel and those Gentile peoples, blessing of those Gentile peoples through Israel. And this is important because I think many of us assume a kind of zero-sum game between the chosenness of Israel and the sort of well-being of Gentile peoples or something like that, so that the more that God is committed to Israel, the less God can be committed to Gentile peoples, or vice versa. In fact, as you see, I think in the text I had you read, the way the relationship between Israel and the Gentiles works is the hope for the Gentiles actually lies in God's undying commitment to Israel. So that the more faithful God is to Israel, the more hope there is for the Gentile peoples of the world. And this is because God is doing something in and through Israel that spills out into Gentile people's lives and welcomes them to participate in the blessings of the kingdom of the God of Israel. We're going to see that unfold in the story. So just don't assume that, despite the tensions that there definitely are between the chosenness of Israel and the Gentile peoples, that this is a zero-sum game. Somehow we need to try to negotiate those tensions in a way that is mindful of what we've been reading in the Old Testament, namely that the hope of the Gentiles actually lies with the faithfulness of the God of Israel, to who that God has revealed himself to be. I think I posted in one of the groups just a thought that it would not be good news for Gentiles if the God that reaches out to them is a God who has given up on that God's promises, given up on the people that that God has made his own. So I don't think that we should rush to claim the benefit for ourselves from a God who has moved on, shall we say, from God's previous commitments. Instead, the hope that we cultivate as Christians is that of a God who pursues his people despite their corruption all the way to the death and beyond. That's the sort of God in whom we've encountered in Jesus as the Messiah of Israel. In the parking garage here, so there's going to be some background noise. Sorry, low production value for the videos. You're going to be turning now to chapters 2 through 4 in the work for this week. I hope that you'll be able to track the development of the scenes, how they build one upon the next. And the questions are designed, the study questions that you'll see in the first response forum, to help you zero in on key moments in the narrative and to begin to perhaps pay attention to features of the narrative that you have been in the habit of glossing over. So I look forward to your responses after you have wrestled with the text some. And one thing to keep in mind, I think I mentioned this in the sort of audio recording that I've done of my own kind of comments and exposition of this stretch of the narrative, it is that Jesus is not known to everyone in the story as the Messiah. In fact, arguably he's known to very few, if any, people of the story as the Messiah. And you want to do your best to sort of respect the ambiguity of Jesus in the course of his presentation in Matthew. The characters are going to be relating to Jesus in all kinds of different ways, and we sometimes have this idea in our mind that Jesus has made it clear exactly who he is, and they're all screw-ups because they don't get it, or something like that. Allow the story to show you the limits on Jesus' self-revelation. Don't import into the characters things that the story hasn't told you about them. Let Jesus be the ambiguous character that he is, and see what that does for the meaning of his interactions with other characters in the story. Okay, this is getting very loud in the garage. I don't know how loud it's going to be on the recording. Once again, thanks for your excellent participation thus far. I hope to see some of you during the office hours by video conference, if you want to call it that, this Friday at 10 a.m. The link to Blue Jeans is on Moodle, and I'd be happy to take your questions, have some further conversation with you in that context, and it can handle as many members of our class that want to sign in at once. And there will be some protocols for how we communicate on that depending on our numbers, where we'll probably have people, as our numbers grow, ask their questions by instant message, and then I'll respond to them and perhaps allow the person to unmute themselves to be able to engage in some conversation themselves directly. We probably just won't be able to have 20 people with their mics on at the same time. That could get messy. But I look forward to trying to figure that out with you guys, and hope you have a good week studying the material in week 2. Thanks again for your hard work.